Welcome to Leaders in Conversation, where we explore more human ways to work with leaders that are challenging the conventional wisdom. We're no longer in the industrial age, but we often think about work that way and are still stuck in that paradigm. Being human at work is complex and challenging, but it's worth the effort because it's the path to a more productive, engaged, and motivated people. Welcome. I am your host, Ken Blackwell, and I am joined by my co-host, Amanda Cookson. Today, have a special guest, Veronica Fossa. She is going to be speaking on the topic of what is lost by fitting in. Veronica is a multi-passionate entrepreneur who has focused her work around the culture of food at work. Today, she's agreed to share her experiences of closing down her consultancy business, and she'll step us through what failure has taught her about herself, her fear of being an outsider, and the crucial role that moving on plays in every leader's journey. And we want to welcome Veronica with us here today. So let's toss things over to Amanda to welcome folks who are on Zoom with us.
Yep. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. This week, we're going to be exploring what's lost by fitting in. And one of the things that Veronica is going to talk about is her business, which was focused around the food industry. So what I would love you to do in chat today is to put where you're from and how food has shaped your experience at work. So where you're from and how food has shaped your experience at work. And if you can use all panelists and attendees when you share, that would be wonderful.
Awesome, thank you. So, Veronica, so what has food got to do with workplace culture and in particular being human at work?
That's a good question, really good question. I think at the most basic level, we all need to eat, right? And we all need to work, apparently. And we spend about 8 hours a day working, sometimes more. And we spend 1/3 of our life working. So that's a lot. And that's a very basic level. But food is also identity, is also lifestyle. And so when we think about, for example, about what we like, the type of food that represents us, when we want to bring all ourselves to work, we also bring the food that represents ourselves. So for example, and Amanda knows this story pretty well because she has heard it before. With my first job, I was 18 and I moved to England for a month for an internship. And so my first day, I was asked to make a cup of coffee for my boss. And I'm Italian. That was my first experience abroad. And when I went to the kitchen and to make coffee, I found a jar of filter of Nescafe. And to me, Nescafe was like, what? What is this thing? I mean, I was used to making coffee with a mocha, the espresso kind of coffee, really like short one, dark one. And so when I had to make coffee, basically, I brew a cup of coffee that was really short and really dark. And that's a way to say that coffee is really, it's part of me, part of my DNA, part of the lifestyle that I've always had. And so when I brought it to my boss and she saw that cup of coffee, she was like, what is this thing? And she threw it away. And I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. There is no right or wrong with food. We all have our preferences. We all have our tastes. We all like different things, and we all have different upbringings and backgrounds. And so obviously that was my experience of coffee. And she had a very different experience of coffee. But she didn't really explain to me how she wanted her coffee. And that could have been like an opportunity for us, two different cultures. Like I was very young at 17, 18. My English wasn't good at that time. And she was around 50, so much more mature and more experienced than me. So that could have been an opportunity for the two of us to start talking, just to say, hey, this is where I come from. This is where I come from. Let's talk about coffee. Let's get to know each other better through coffee. And so that's a way that you can use food to engage people, to make sure it's like that first taste, right? It's the initial taster to get people to start talking and to really get to know each other. So that's the thing about food. That's the magic of food.
So there's a piece of that that's identity, right? That it says something about who we are, where we're from, all of that. And some of the best holiday parties I have been to have been ones with multicultural offices where people bring in, things that are kind of from their heritage, right? And you kind of get that mix mash of things from different continents, and that's a lovely thing. But there's also a piece of this that is assumption, right? That we assume that our identity or our ideas around food are universally shared, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can speak a little bit to how identity plays out in food, and how it is we can share that of ourselves through food.
Yeah, sure. I think when it comes to food, we need to be, and when it comes to culture in general, we need to be very humble and just not assume that our truth is universal. And just being open, that's a key, really, like being curious to other people's culture, other people's food. And so, for example, like Italians tend to be very skeptical about other cuisines. And so when they go abroad, the average Italian usually go to Italian restaurants. And for me, it's like, no, why should I go to an Italian restaurant abroad? I'm interested in that culture. I'm sure that I will find things that are amazing in other restaurants and in other countries. And so that was my experience. Like after that experience in the UK when I was 18, I decided to study abroad. And at 21, I moved to Finland. And I spent in total like 6 years in the Nordic countries working with food. And the funny thing was that I didn't work with Italian food, I worked with local food. And a friend of mine was working for the touristic board. She was like, oh, you're the most knowledgeable foreigner about, you know so much about Finnish food, more than Finnish people themselves. But that's the thing, like when you come and you have a different perspective, you see things with fresh eyes, you are able to emphasize and bring out things and parts that locals or people who see it like every day might not be able to see that.
And I think it's that curiosity, right? This is something that I see in the US. Because it's here, we may ignore things that are common. There might be places or aspects of food. And when we go somewhere new, if we have that curiosity, if we are open, then we start to dig into it. I had a friend come from Malaysia, and it prompted me to go and visit the Statue of Liberty for the first time. And I just had never gotten around to it. It's about an hour away from where I live. Had just never gotten there, but finally had somebody who was interested in seeing it, like, oh gosh, I guess I ought to go do this. And I, kind of felt bad that, I'd spent my entire life and not gone to, this sort of major symbol of the country, just because it was around the corner. And I thought, oh, I'll always get to it. Right. So there's needs to be something that sparks that curiosity.
Just looking in the chat at the feedback from people about their experiences of food at work. So Mitch has said that his cultural background means that food plays an important part in all aspects of his life, including work, and it's an opportunity to build, connect, and support community. Feast and Fables, they're very passionate about food. They run a deli for 5 years, and they have created feasts to support people alongside the business. I know they're excellent cooks. Juliana from Colombia said food's been a great communication tool for her at work. It's got the power to transmit ideas and connect people around it. And then Kamal has said they've found, this is again from Feast and Founders, food being the best expression of people and place. I'm just thinking about my experience. So I've kind of put around the Peak District. When I think of food at work, I think of feeling really lonely and sat at my desk with packet food because I didn't have time to bring anything, and just eating something that's not particularly nutritious or delicious. And I just wondered what your thinking is, because you talked about some positive aspects of food, but what about in those kind of toxic and slightly less positive workplaces? What happens with food in those?
Yeah, no, I think, of course, there are positive aspects and negative aspects. And when I got into this field a few years ago, the main purpose for me was to fight this widespread plague, which has a name. It's called desktop dining. Because obviously that's the experience for many people, and you sacrifice the enjoyment of food for productivity, for being perceived as a really good worker who was sitting there, work. And to me this was a bit didn't really make sense, and I got there after that coffee experience when I was 18, when I started working for food agencies, and I was in charge of creating food experiences at conferences, at music festivals. And so we were creating those feasts, like John Joe and Barry said, where people would come together, they would enjoy food. We would bring like really amazing chefs, and the whole experience, like music, the setup, everything was amazing. But when it comes to us, the people who were creating the experience, we were hardly having any break. Like we were really working all the time, and there was no focus on food itself. There was no focus on well-being. And so that's how I got into that, and I started to think like, okay, this is my experience, and that's experience of so many other people that I know, who are like working and just not having the time to. Employers are not creating the opportunity to have a break for 10-15 minutes, half an hour. So even if some people might want to, there is no culture. So that's the thing, like there is really no culture. And I'm afraid that with this global pandemic, we are returning to that. Like there has been some steps forward, because obviously food has become a very popular perk in workplaces around the world. And I think the way I saw it was that food is not only a perk, but it's part of the culture. It's ingrained within the culture. So it's not just what you bring, something that's nutritious, but it's also the whole environment, the way that people eat together. But with the pandemic, obviously, and office workers working from home, then there is this whole thing that changes. And when office workers are returning to the workplace, the main priority now is health, is making sure that people are not amassing each other like in long queues. And so canteens are really reinventing the whole thing at the moment. And just, I read this article yesterday and I was so shocked. It was an article that was in the food section of an one of the main Italian newspapers. And it just presented this scenario of lockers made, they were fridges, basically lockers, where workers can get their food from. And the food is prepared outside, the lunch is really nutritious. So there is no way to, have a little bit of escapism if you want some chocolate or something, to lift you up. Nothing like that, just nutritious. And you get your meal and you take it to your desk. So that's the scenario. And I'm like, no, really? I don't want that. I don't want it. Where's that, like, very hard and where's the warmth in that? It's nowhere. We are just really, thinking about this, about systems, and thinking about how to make this work for workers. But how about how they feel? about that? How about the communal aspect that was all really like part of the food experience for workers and for people eating together?
I remember when you first talked about food culture, and I think you asked us to think about these swanky modern offices that have these wonderful kitchens and spaces that are there for people to eat and to use, but are never used. And I remember when I kind of worked in corporate, we had a kitchen where you weren't allowed to use the toaster. There was no stove, there was no cooking. Anything that would create steam was a problem. So you literally had a kettle and a microwave. So being kind of creative and cooking in that space really isn't a possibility.
No, at the moment it isn't. I mean, and we are really, when lockdown started, Italy was one of the first, if not the first country in Europe. And so in the beginning, it felt like, so it's just us, and I thought I need to reinvent my work. And then the week after, I had a couple of clients. We were like discussing a few projects in the UK and Germany. They were in the corporate catering business, and they had no people to feed anymore, all of a sudden. And so this whole thing was like, right, this industry will be deeply affected, and it's not over yet, because their turnover, again, like referring to that article in Italian, they had like a 60% decrease in turnover this year. So it's huge. It's huge. And it's not just about, it's about like changing, again, behavior and reinventing the whole industry and making sure that it's not just systems, but also everything that's connecting to feeling and well-being and connecting people, which is at the core the idea of the physical office, right?
So maybe you can speak a little bit about food culture, and so what are the things which are gained when people share and eat food together, right? And so we can contrast that to what's happening when they're sitting at their desk and having a meal by themselves, right? Can you maybe talk about what are some of the benefits individually, and then also for the organization when people eat and share food together versus sitting at their desk?
Yeah. So there has been like a few studies conducted in the firefighter, how's it called? Firefighter houses?
Yeah,
firehouses.
So, and those studies basically try to explore what happens when those people basically get the food, crack the food together, and cook together. And there were lots of benefits in that were shown basically in the way that they supported each other, trust that was created between each other, but also there is these moments of what's it called? That serendipity that just happens when you're sitting together with no agenda. You're not doing, you might be talking about a project that you're doing together, or you might connect to people who are working in different offices or different teams. So breaking the so-called silo. But also like you have that moment of break. It's just really like having stop halfway to your day to just sit together and share something. And then again, when that is designed in a way to sometimes like make sure that people get to know each other. So you talked earlier, Ken, about multicultural cultures. So when you have team members from different cultures, then you can showcase all the different food. And that's a way for each of them to bring a bit of them to the other team members. So that's the benefit, like in terms of collective benefit. Of course, you have the well-being part, which is super important. And so when you are designing, when you're serving food that's nutritious, then people feel better. They don't have those post-lunch coma. They are really they are producing more. They are more effective. So there are tons of benefits, actually. And individually, obviously, if you don't need to think about food that you need to bring to your office, but food is served already there, then you're also saving a bit of time, you're saving a bit of money. And food makes the workplace, or it also has effects or benefits in terms of employer branding. So how the employer is perceived both inside, and so inside the organization and outside the organization, like to attract talents, but also to retain talents. And that's really, really important.
Jules has put in the chat here, it's really human and a beautiful way to engage with each other and let the brain settle and refresh. I want to talk about the pandemic then. And so running a business that is based on food culture at work, when no one is going into work, is a bit problematic. So it would be great if you could kind of step us through your story and kind of what's happened to your work this year.
Sure. That's an interesting story, I guess. So let's rewind it to February. Yes, end of February. So around the end of February, I decided to enroll in an online program hosted by Marie Forleo, famous American entrepreneur. It's called B School. And when the pandemic hit, it was about week 1 or 2 of B School. And so I decided to enroll because I had slowly moved part of my business online. I had a podcast that I was hosting where I interviewed different people working as food program managers or head of bites inside organizations like Airbnb and all, and several activist chefs working, for example, in hospital. And so I had enrolled in this program, and at some point when the pandemic hit and this whole thing happened, that I had these clients basically freezing projects, canceling projects. At some point I found myself with no business anymore. So I thought, what am I gonna do now? Am I pivoting like I did several times, like I think every one of us did and do over the course of a lifetime? Or do I just really change? Do I close that business? So when I started to think about closing the business, I kind of presented scenarios like in front of me, and I thought, all right, if I close, what is it going to happen? And for the first time so I ran this business for 6 years. I pivoted halfway through it from designing food experiences at conferences and festivals to focusing entirely to the corporate culture. I realized that I was ready to let it go. And that was I felt so relieved, when I landed on that decision. And obviously it wasn't easy. I mean, I didn't really take it so lightly, obviously, because I really invested a lot of time, energy. Besides this podcast, I had a blog. And so this whole thing about creating a business and creating setting a niche for myself, that was very specific. That I haven't met anyone who worked this same business in the same exact way. And so when I started to think about letting this go, so it wasn't just the pandemic itself, because as I said, I could have pivoted in a way or another, created some online courses, I don't know. It just felt that I in a way had outgrown that business. I wanted to include other parts of myself that for a long time I wasn't able to express. I wasn't able to bring into the business because it became so specific and so niche that it was just food, workplace, sometimes interiors, but just very, very specific. And there were other things that I really wanted to do, that I wanted to do like as a work. And so around the end, that was the end of April, I shared in the B School Facebook group that I had decided to close my business. And that was so against, every normal, because obviously like people sign up to that course to start their business or grow their business. And that was me saying, I'm closing. I just realized that I don't want to run this business anymore. I just want to do something different. And when I did, I was so surprised because I was inundated with messages and comments by people who had come to the same realization. They also wanted to close their business, or people who had realized that, or who wanted to share like their experience of closing their business. And that's not something that you talk about. That's what I really, realized through this whole experience. Because usually there is a lot of talk about launching your business, growing your business, this whole thing about success in the common ways. And that was me talking about closing this business because pandemic plus me outgrowing it, plus like several things that really affected my decision. The thing is that, obviously, usually people, when they go through something so big and life-changing for them, like closing a business. I mean, for me, I worked on it for 6 years, so that was a big part of my life. They go on a sabbatical, they go traveling and stuff like that. But this year, obviously, I couldn't really go anywhere. So I also had to figure out, how do I find space to rest and to really, refresh and just find space for myself again. So that was a really interesting experience and not something I regret at all.
Well, so it wasn't that you were walking away from business generally, right? This was you're seeing a need to transition, to go to something new, to evolve, right? That, you're just like, this business as an entity no longer serves. And so I want to move to something different, right? Because I don't think people see shutting things down as the possibility for transition. They see it as maybe walking away and like, I'm giving it up. I'm not going to run a business anymore. I'm just going to become an employee. I'm retreating, right? As opposed to I am evolving. And I think what you're talking about is the opportunity to evolve. But in order to move on to the next thing, you have to let go of what was. Is that an accurate understanding of what you're doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In my mind, it was always like, I see myself as an entrepreneur. I see myself having the freedom to work with people I like. I see myself like creating the lifestyle I want. And so that's also what I realized through this business, that at times I was sacrificing really my lifestyle for the business. And so that's a thing, like as a self-employed, you have like an immense responsibility. No one is telling you what to do. It's just always up to you. And sometimes we just create a box around ourselves. That's really what I noticed, for myself, that I was into that box and I had to break it free. Like I had to tear down all the walls and just see like, right, what can I do now? What opportunities could I explore? Who am I again? Because for a long time, people recognized me as the person working with food at work. I still have people coming to me because they find this article, on Google, and I'm the food at work person. So I think it will take a bit of time. Again, identity, right? So it's not that all of a sudden from day one to day two, you can really reinvent yourself as radically. It takes some time. But it has always been clear that I want to work for myself. and in different ways as before. Like I'm really looking for like to collaborate with other people more than I used to do, but I'm not really keen in finding an employer and working like full-time in a corporate environment.
Well, so there's those two pieces of identity, right? Like we were talking earlier about the identity that we get from the food that we eat, that we share, right? And there's then the identity that comes from the role that we might happen to be in. And both of those can be a platform to build on. They can also be limiting, right? Like if you could only share Italian food because you're Italian, right? And not share any of the Finnish food that you know so much about, right? And likewise, being an entrepreneur that gets associated with a particular business, being shackled by that role then, right? When really the role is entrepreneur or a business owner. It's more than the particular business that you might happen to have, right? But that bit of identity for both of those is very intriguing to me.
No, definitely. And, over the time when I ran We Factory, I also mentored and coached some fellow entrepreneurs, but it wasn't something that I thought I could openly talk about because my business was We Factory. So it was a very, I know and realize a bit of a short-sighted approach or mindset, from my side. But I didn't feel there was a container for that within We Factory. I also created a website that feature quotes by extraordinary women called What Women Say that people can find at whatwomensay.org. And again, that was something I created but never really talked about because my main business was We Factory, and so I had to stick to that. And I think I had to go through this process really to realize what things could be possible, and also to look at other entrepreneurs and see that there are really many ways of doing things. There isn't one thing that, a full-time business, but you couldn't combine several businesses together or just devote your time to all these different things that you want to do in your life. So I think the lesson for me was that there isn't one way. There is one way to success. It's always up to you. You can create it for yourself, and even though you might not find models or examples, you can become the first model and the first example that people can look at. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes like we really, at least I used to, sometimes I look at other examples, and other people just as a way to reassuring myself that's okay. But the reality is that there is always a pioneer, someone who starts, you take the less traveled route. And again, when I think about this business, I also did take the less traveled route. It's just that sometimes you need a reminder, right, that it's possible for you and that you have those resources inside of you. So that was the biggest learning for me.
And I think that kind of less traveled route that you're describing kind of really chimes with the title of our talk today, which is What's Lost by Fitting In. So what Veronica had asked everybody in chat to do is to complete the sentence. So by fitting in, I lose. So if you can kind of put in your thoughts, what comes up for you. By fitting in, I lose. And Veronica, while people are doing that, what I would love to hear from you is, what do you now know about what's lost by fitting in?
That's a good question. I'm really curious to see what people will really, reply to that question. I think, the first answer, there could be so many, really. I think the first answer is fun. Fun. That's the thing that I realized over the past, let's say, a year, that had lost fun in doing what I was doing. It felt more like an obligation, something that I had to do and behave in a certain way as I was as I was working with a specific kind of environment. And so I had to show up and talk in a certain way. And then when you're creating content that might match some expectations, then there wasn't fun anymore. And I think when there is fun in what you do, you can also be more creative and just come up with different solutions that other people might not come up with.
Because I think
so that's the first.
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you create your own business. So it feels like there's kind of infinite freedom, but it sounds like for you, you'd kind of created this kind of very specific niche. And so are you kind of saying then that your identity became very squashed within that?
Totally. I think when I look at it from the outside, now I just, I'm being very honest. I think the kind of profile that I created for myself was that in a way I was showing employer that I had such a knowledge about this topic and I could have been the perfect project manager for this role inside a big company. The thing is, I never wanted that. And so that's a bit of it's that became a problem because as I didn't want it, then all of a sudden I was trying to match that profile in getting to know that more and more, but I wasn't expressing or many of my interests and passions that I wanted to bring into my business.
We've got some great answers to that query in chat here. Our friend Penny Lee says, I lose my laugh. Grace, by fitting in, I lose my creativity. She also said, I lose my true sense of purpose. Carolyn said, by fitting in, I lose the opportunity to find something better. Feast and Fable said, there's a great saying, to fit inside the cookie cutter, you have to take a bit off. Cut off. Lost, right? Mitch says, I lose the opportunity to become more of myself, to be curious, to be more creative. Our friend Joel says, by fitting in, I lose the essence of who I am and what I uniquely bring to the world. If, however, I'm fitting in with my tribe, it's beautiful. And Jonathan just added, in a previous leaders conversation, we had a speaker who was encouraging go niche, super focus. So yeah, you might lose some of that ability to find that niche if you go try and fit in too much.
Interesting. So
yeah, the niche, I think sorry to interrupt you, Amanda. I think what I'm saying here is that it's not as wrong to be niche, not at all. But you can combine all the different aspects of yourself, what you want to bring into the business, and make it still very niche. And I think that's the best way to go, actually, and that was my experience with this business. Because as I combined design, food, and workplace well-being and employee experience, then people started to recognize me for that person who was within that intersection. So it's easier to describe yourself. What I'm saying is that you need to be careful that what you're combining together is really what you want to do. And obviously you can always take a piece out of this intersection or this combination and just add a more piece, another piece of yourself based on your interests, talents, whatever, skill that you want to develop. So nothing wrong with being niche. Just the main thing is when we know ourselves, when we really know what we want, then it becomes easier to materialize, to create something that is really what we want for our life.
Well, it's easy to accidentally create a golden prison, right? And while it's beautiful, it's still a prison. So you have to be thoughtful about how we're constructing those things.
I want to ask you about letting go. So when I was reflecting on this talk and I was kind of putting out the sort of promotion to encourage people to come, I was thinking about how I worked in an organization for probably 7 years longer than I should have done, because I was afraid to go, and I was afraid of what was to come, even though I was really, really unhappy. And so I wonder what your kind of thinking is now that you have let go. What is it that enabled you to do that? And why do you think we find it so hard as humans to kind of let go and move on?
That's a good question. And then I also want to hear your answering the question that all the attendants answered, by fitting in, I lose. So I would be really, I would be really curious to hear your answer too. But to answer your question, when I decided to let go of this business, it happens in a very particular moment when I had lost all the business. So basically, I was in a point in a situation where I could easily say, like, right, there was the whole investment, branding, content creation, and so on and so forth. But it became easier to let it go. Like, if you had asked me, let's say in January or December, I would have said, no, maybe I still want to do this. And again, I don't have children. I'm like in a situation where it was quite easy for me to say, I'm letting go of this business to create something else. But obviously, when you have some obligations, mortgage, family, it becomes very, so you need to put like all the different parts of your life next to each other, and just to consider, like, am I able to do this now? But then again, I think the jumping off the cliff, you're just taking a leap of faith. And there is a beautiful quote by Julia Cameron, the author of The Artist's Way. And this quote goes, when you take the leap, there will be a net that appears, magically. And I've had experience of that a few times in my life, not this time yet, but, when things start falling into place and you're just, you're jumping into the unknown. That was also my experience of that. I'm just like, I don't know what will happen, but are we sure that we are so sure about our future? Because if the pandemic has taught us anything, is that really nothing is certain. And I've asked that to a trend forecaster. So it's her job really, to forecast the future. And she was like, well, there might be more pandemics, it might happen. Like it was forecasted in a way, because with these viruses and people moving from country to continents, I mean, it takes a moment, as we have seen, to spread a virus across continents. So it was maybe forecasted in a way, but they didn't know that this would happen in March 2020. So the thing is, we need to be able to live with uncertainty, because everything is really uncertain. And sometimes, like, you stay in a situation where you're really unhappy, instead of jumping into something that could make you like super happy and so fulfilled. So I'm also curious, like, to hear whether that was your experience, Amanda, like when you jumped into the unknown.
I think for me, maybe a bit like you, I was kind of pushed in the sense that, my department shut, so there was no more job for me. And I was really uncomfortable. And I think just what you were saying there about getting comfortable with the unknown and with the not knowing, I think that really resonates with me, because actually in that space of discomfort, not having to have all the answers, I can follow what brings me joy. And I'm so much more happy than I ever thought I would be. But there is always, I think, when you run your own business, that navigating that pathway where I don't really know what tomorrow's going to bring, but it is about doing what you can and trusting there'll be a net.
I can think about my own experience. I had the intention to leave the consultancy where I worked and to go out on my own, and was trying to engineer a soft transition to, somehow get a couple clients lined up, get some income coming in, something that wouldn't be a cold turkey, just hard transition from one thing to the other, and failed miserably at making that happen. And then finally got to the point of, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to have to do it. And so I did, and, went in and handed in my resignation to a place I'd worked at for 18 years. Okay, well, we'll see what happened. And literally the next day, a contact had come to me and said, hey, I've got this new project coming in, and so, well, I'm leaving. And okay, great. Well, do you have a non-compete? No. Okay, great. Well, we don't know the company really well, but we know you. We like you. We'd like you to take this contract on. And so, literally, a day or two after taking that leap, the universe turned around, and I had some work, and then one thing led to another, right? But goodness, it was scary making that that first leap. But there is something to intentionality and having that out there in the world, and particularly as you start to share the fact that you're out on your own now, people go, oh, great, well, here, and things come to you. But not knowing for sure that net is there makes the leap very daunting.
Yeah, totally. And I also want to clarify that it wasn't so like everything right. When I decided to leave and I wrote that post in B School's Facebook group, I was so excited. And then all of like a few weeks after, then the whole excitement wore off. And I was like, is this the right decision? And I started to think about it. And then I told myself, yeah, it is. It was more heart than mind, and maybe even more like, say, more my intuition talking to me rather than being like very logic in a way. So many people like felt sorry. They were like, oh, I'm so sorry for you and your business. I'm like, you don't need to feel sorry. There is no point. And of course, I ask myself, so what now? Will I be able to create something that will be meaningful? How will I earn money? Creating a new business again, what's the right setting? And this whole thing, like if I need to do, when I do freelance work, what kind of work will I look for? Because again, like as a solopreneur, I used to do everything. I spent a lot of time learning new skills and so on. And so I could do basically really anything. So I'm not saying that it has been easy so far, but at some point I just knew that I had to take, and I had to go that way, and I haven't looked back.
So what might be some advice you'd have for people perhaps at that decision point, now with looking back and knowing your experience, what advice, what sort of tips might you have for someone to make their decision a little bit easier, perhaps with the benefit of your experience?
Mm-hmm. I think, what helped me in that moment was creating some scenarios. Like, let's think about, what if I close my business today? How might my life look like? And that was a good exercise. When you start like listing options for yourself. Then there was also a book which was recommended by Mish Bondizio, who is attending today. And the book is, I think the author is Dave Burnett, Designing Your Life. And that was a really, really good book. Dave Burnett, and I'm so bad with names, but.
And Mitch, if you're in chat there, if you could type in that title, everyone would dying to know what this book is.
Designing Your Life. I think Mish, maybe she can help, and because I think she can remember the title of the authors at least. So I think really looking at your life from all the different parts of it, like work and relationships, health, spirituality. Here you go.
Yeah, Mish, put that.
I think that really helped, because I started to look at my life in considering all different parts of it, not just work, but also relationships and health and so on. And so this is really a book that I would recommend, not just for people who are looking to, close a business, close their project, but for anyone who is at the moment in your life and you're like, maybe I could aspire to something better for myself. Maybe I need to take a look at my relationships and see whether I can improve this part of my life, or health, or spirituality. I think we are really, like, as humans, a work in progress. So we are never really done, luckily. That's maybe the purpose of our lifetime on this earth. So there are always aspects of our life that could be improved just a little bit. And so this was a really helpful book to read, and definitely, like, thinking about the scenario and just playing that scenario in our minds. What could happen? How could I behave? Maybe even trying that out for a week, and seeing whether that scenario works for you. Because I also heard so many people, like, when I share that blog post on my website, when I explained the whole situation and that I had decided to close my business, so many people sent me emails and messages, and they said, oh, I've been there. I didn't feel like I didn't feel that I could speak up about that I could, in a way, normalize, failure, because this failure is like huge label that we put on ourselves and other people put on us. And so, like, so many people also said, like, oh, I stayed in that job, I stayed in that business for way too long. And in that moment, when I realized that it was no longer a place where I wanted to stay, it was too late. And so when it's too late, like, you might, you just, in a way, don't do it properly. You just decide to cut bridges, or just to end relationships in the wrong way. And for me, it was like, I want to treat this professionally. It's like just any other part of business. It's an important moment, and I want to take people with me on this journey. And it's a huge part also of my, growth as a person and as a business owner, entrepreneur.
I love the way how you have been so unapologetic about your decision, and that I think at the moment a lot of business owners are finding things really tricky. And so that kind of feeling of failing, that shame of failure, is really hard. And I think maybe we cling to things because we don't want to feel like we're failing. And what I would love is for you to maybe share some of your mindset and some of the way that you think about things. So if people are listening, and then when we kind of write things up afterwards, if they're in that space of discomfort, it can give them a different frame for seeing their situation.
Mm-hmm. I think in the past months, I've tried to look at it as a learning rather than, as a failure, because in hindsight we can always say, like, oh, I should have done this, or I should have changed this other thing. And obviously what we know now is not what we knew back then. Luckily, because we grow, that's a good sign. It would be a problem if now, and you look back at 5 years before, that you would be the same identical person. That would be a huge problem. So I've read a lot of books, and also been working on myself in terms of mindset. And so I've been able to shift it and just say, think of it as a learning. So when I look at my business, I'm thinking, what am I learning from these? And that's a bit also like the mindset that I used to have when I had some bad work experiences. It's really challenging. It's really tough sometimes to shift this whole thing, and not just think of what could have gone right, or that person had that wonderful experience, everything went wrong with me. I had a toxic I worked in a toxic environment. I had a really bad boss. I was bullied. I was, this all that sometimes happen. This whole like series of things that might happen in a workplace. So I think it was really for me like shifting this whole from failure to learning. What am I learning here? And just looking at how I possibly might not do the same mistakes when I create this other business. It's really hard for me to explain, this whole mindset thing. It's also the first time maybe that I'm really like talking about it. What I can say is just that I'm always telling myself, what am I learning here?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than what should I've done. Sometimes my mind tricks me and I get there like, oh, I should have done this, or but I'm just telling myself, okay, you did this mistake. Next time you won't be doing it the same way. And so if just not work, you can have that same mindset for all parts of your life. And just by having that, we possibly learn something new, and we have that positive outlook of things that help us overcome difficulties and just be open to opportunities. Or else, you're just, when you always think like, oh, I should have done this. It's like having these things around rather than being wide open for anything that could come your way.
Should is a word that we all need to just get rid of. There is no space in the mind for should. Thank you so much. I think that is really helpful, and I think that kind of feeling and space of what am I learning from this, I think will be a really helpful tool, because there are going to be challenges, I think, ahead of all of us. So seeing everything as an opportunity for learning is a great thing to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Veronica. This has been a phenomenal conversation today. And I think you've been able to give folks a new way of looking at experiences, certainly from how we connect with others and the value of food and the culture that can bring, to how we even think about our experiences. And I love this idea of taking everything as simply a learning experience, right? What has this taught me? What have I learned? Rather than as some zero sum, oh gosh, so the failure, okay, well now I've lost, right? Well, even failures can teach you something, right?
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to share all of this with you and with the attendants.
And I think it's so important at this point in time as well to just give people a different definition of success.
Indeed. And so let us talk about what's going to happen next week. So next week, we are back for episode 4 in our second season here, and we're going to be discussing leading scared, what fear in leadership looks like and how to overcome it with Elizabeth Chacher. This is going to be a really fascinating conversation about leadership and what happens when we're dealing with leaders who are acting scared, and how that can impact us and our organizations. So look forward to seeing you here next week. Veronica, thank you from Amanda and I, and to our audience. Thank you for being here today and your input. And we look forward to seeing all of you here next week at Leaders in Conversation.
And if people want to carry on the conversation with Veronica, what's the best way to do that?
Yes, Veronica, what's the best way?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I wanted to share, I've created a page on my new website, which is not up yet. So I'm sharing the link so here is the link. It will be live tomorrow. So I'm going to share like some more links and some books I mentioned. Just a sec.
So yeah,
and I can send that to everybody as well who's got tickets. I can do that through the Eventbrite system, so they've got that.
Yeah, the book we had mentioned earlier was Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And if you're looking in chat, you can see where veronicafossa.com is in the website, along with a link to Leaders in Conversation there. Awesome.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.